Herzlich willkommen zur Sternstunde Philosophie. Der Frühling steht vor der Tür und damit auch die schönste Zeit, um sich zu verlieben. Da mag man vielleicht nicht daran denken, dass die Liebe auch enden kann, ja sogar in vielen Fällen enden wird. Glauben wir meinem heutigen Gast, ist die Liebe sogar gefährdeter denn je. Ich begrüße sehr herzlich Eva Illouz hier in Berlin. Sie ist eine der bekanntesten Soziologinnen unserer Zeit, Professorin an der Hebräischen Universität von Jerusalem und der ÖHESS in Paris. Und sie studiert seit 20 Jahren unsere Liebesverhältnisse. Herzlich willkommen.
Hallo.
Frau Illouz, Sie haben dieses Buch geschrieben als letztes Buch, Warum Liebe endet. Muss denn jede Liebe zwangsläufig enden?
Of course not. Many loves will not end, but more and more love does end. It has become a regular feature of our lives. And so the question is why? One of the reasons why that is the case is that, contrary to previous times, people explore their sexuality more and more. And because sexuality has become, fortunately, more legitimate, then they can now accumulate partners. And in accumulating partners, they almost inevitably have several relationships until they have, let's say, one big love, or until they don't have it, and until, you know, they have a series of cumulative relationships. So when I speak about the end of love, I don't mean certainly that everybody's love is doomed to end. I mean only that the structure of our lives is such that we move fluidly from one story to another.
Genau, und die Liebe ist gefährdet, weil unsere Lebensverhältnisse sich geändert haben. Darüber werden wir ganz viel sprechen heute. Beginnen wir vielleicht noch einmal damit, wie eigentlich überhaupt diese Liebesverhältnisse sich verändert haben im Verhältnis zu den Trennungsmöglichkeiten. Sie zeigen sehr schön auf, dass es früher das ökonomische Modell war, das die Partner zusammengehalten hat. Tausch, Liebe gegen Geld quasi. Der Mann hat nur in einer festen Beziehung Sexualität erleben können. Die Frau wiederum brauchte einen festen Partner, um ökonomisch überhaupt gesichert zu sein. Heute hingegen gibt es die romantische Liebe. Und in der romantischen Liebe sind wir frei zu gehen. Ist das ein Fortschritt?
Of course it is a progress, but a progress does not mean that things are easy or that we're necessarily happier. So in previous, let's say, traditional societies, divorce was much more difficult, and choice was not even really possible, mostly for women, but both for men and women. So the capacity to choose your partner has been accompanied by the capacity to unchoose your partner, in a way, that is, to back out of a relationship if you wish to. So the price to pay for having a greater choice is that we are the object of somebody else's unchoice, or that we ourselves exert a non-choice of someone else. So that is a progress if you believe in the idea of autonomy and freedom of the individual, and if you believe in the relative autonomy of the individual vis-à-vis the community, vis-à-vis religion, and vis-à-vis society. But progress does not mean that things are, as I said, easier, or that they bring us happiness. We may make progress and be less happy. I think this is what we need to understand.
Und das heißt auch, dass mehr Autonomie, mehr Selbstbestimmung nicht zwangsläufig glücklich machen.
Yes, that's exactly what I said. And I think often people confuse the two, and this is the ways or the reasons why often conservative people criticize contemporary society or liberal norms or freedom, because they do observe that this increased freedom does not lead to a greater happiness. But I think we need to make a choice, and we have made it collectively, namely if we prefer to be more happy or more free. I think we collectively prefer to be happy, prefer to be free, more free, even if it brings less, I think, I mean, I wouldn't say happiness, but less well-being. I don't think we are well equipped as individuals to live on our own, to live outside strong communities. But I think communities have not proven themselves. I think most of the time communities have oppressed women. Communities don't like strangers. They don't. So the price to be paid for, in my opinion, for freedom is more morality, that is more equality between men and women, and more equality between members of a community and strangers to the community.
Wenn Sie sagen, dass mehr Freiheit nicht wirklich glücklich macht und wir uns trotzdem als Gesellschaft für die Freiheit entscheiden, warum tun wir das denn? Ist das nicht irrational?
Irrational? You know, I don't know how you define rationality. Rationality, from the standpoint of the individual, is definitely to prefer to be more autonomous. I mean, if you can choose, for example, how to control your body, think of women. Most women, I think, if you ask them whether they would be, whether they would want to have their body be under the guardianship of men, as it was the case until the 1960s, 70s, or whether they would prefer the current situation in which they have full autonomy and property over their body, and yet be in a situation where they're less sure of their marital career, of their motherhood, etc. It seems to me that most women would choose to be more autonomous and to have full control over their body. I don't think we could even imagine going back to the situation before the 1960s, where a woman needed the approval of her husband before she could open a bank account. So I think that collectively, again, we cannot go back. So I think this question answers itself. It is perfectly rational in the sense that we would not unchoose, we would not choose otherwise than what we have today.
Ich würde gerne mit Ihnen ein bisschen über diese Trennungen sprechen, wie Trennungen auch vonstatten gehen. Und etwas, was ich in Ihrem Buch gelernt habe, ist, dass die Trennungen meistens von Frauen ausgehen. Warum ist das so?
Well, that is the some of the findings of the 1980s and 90s. I don't know, by the way, if it is still relevant. I think more and more men are also choosing to live relationships, more than in the past. But traditionally, the reason why more women have initiated separations was first because women entered the labor market. And so when women have economic alternatives and possibilities, they more easily opt out of marriage. And second, women and men undergo a different emotional socialization. Women are socialized to care for others, to express their emotions, and therefore expect the very same thing from men. Men, on the other hand, in the capitalist market are socialized to be highly competitive and not to be emotionally expressive. And therefore, for men, it's much more difficult to respond to the demands of women who are socialized otherwise. So I guess because of this, women are the ones who are more likely to be frustrated emotionally. And three, inequality still persists inside the home. And the sex who is the most likely to do a double shift at home is the woman. She works outside and she works at home, with men not pulling their share. And therefore women are more likely to become dissatisfied.
Sie sagen auch, dass es eigentlich wie so verschiedene Narrative der Trennung gibt, die immer wieder fast schon archetypisch auftauchen. Sie nennen 3 solche verschiedenen Typen von Narrativen der Trennung: die Offenbarung, die Anhäufung und das Trauma. Ich würde die gerne kurz mit Ihnen anschauen, weil ich das interessant finde, und zwar insbesondere die Offenbarung. Sie zitieren da aus der Autobiografie von Bertrand Russell, dem berühmten Philosophen, der schreibt oder beschreibt, wie eine Radtour macht und auf der Landstraße vor sich hin radend, schreibt er dann, dass er ganz plötzlich gemerkt hat, dass er seine Frau nicht mehr liebt. Und Sie zitieren ihn, er sagt, ich hatte bis zu diesem Augenblick nicht die leiseste Ahnung gehabt, dass meine Liebe zu ihr nachgelassen hatte, zu der Frau. Und er verlässt sie danach auch. Da denkt man doch irgendwie, das ist schräg.
Well, you know, this is not necessarily what happened. It's not the truth of what happened. It is how he tells himself the story of how he stopped loving her. So it could be that, in fact, along the way, she had disappointed him in very many invisible ways, which he was not willing to acknowledge to himself. And then at some point, this thing comes to his consciousness, and he decides to tell himself that he does not love her anymore. But my point is to say that not only does unloving, the process of disengaging from a loving relationship, it takes many forms, but it takes also many narratives. So they are both different processes, and there are also different stories that people tell themselves.
Und jetzt sind wir sozusagen bei den Geschichten. Und eine solche Geschichte wäre eben diese Offenbarung, dass man das Gefühl hat oder sich im Nachhinein erzählt, es fiel mir wie Schuppen von den Augen.
Yes, that would be the epiphany. In other words, it's a falling in love in reverse. In the same way that some people fall in love simply at first sight by looking one person and they know they are meant for that person. So I would call that narrative of unloving a narrative of falling in love in reverse, where you suddenly understand that you stopped loving that person. There are other ways also of explaining why you stopped loving. You can tell yourself, well, I accumulated so many disappointments and so many frustrations that at some point it just became too much and it overflowed. It's the image of the water that overflows the jug. And there is also another narrative which I found, which is the narrative of trauma, where your partner does something that you find properly shocking, and you never quite fully recuperate over it. You never fully forgive, and you never fully trust again. And that I call the narrative of trauma, because it's as if it is a breach in the relationship of trust that two people have together. And then when the separation arrives, you refer to those events as the events that announce and foretell already what will be. But again, these are retrospective accounts. We don't know for sure that this is actually the reasons, but these are retrospective accounts.
So ist es ja meistens im Leben, oder? Dass wir uns Sachen im Nachhinein irgendwie zurechtlegen, gerade die Brüche im Leben, versuchen wir oft mit einer eigenen Geschichte uns dann so zu erzählen, dass es für uns irgendwie auch Sinn macht, weil wir ja nicht kopflos durchs Leben gehen wollen, sondern uns selber irgendwie auch verstehen in dem, was wir tun.
Yes, indeed, this is what we do. But the book, in my book, Warum Liebe, endet, what I've tried to do is to say that we have on the one hand these retrospective accounts, but on the other hand there are objective forces that make people separate more than it was the case before. So it's not only about understanding what kind of stories we tell ourselves, it's also about understanding why the society in which we live creates forces that are more powerful than our desire to love and be loved, and that undermine from within the bond, invisible to us, that undermine the relationships we try to create. Modern societies contain very many invisible forces that make it very difficult for people to stay together. That's what I try to document in this book.
Genau, und damit sind wir ja eigentlich beim Begriff der negativen Beziehung. Das ist so ein Kernbegriff dieses Buches. Und was daran für mich interessant war, ist unter anderem, dass Sie sehr genau zeigen, dass das Problem der negativen Beziehung eigentlich gar nicht so sehr ist, dass es zu einer Trennung kommt, sondern dass die negative Beziehung eigentlich gar nicht richtig beginnt. Wir sind gar nicht mehr wirklich fähig, sagen Sie, uns aufeinander einzulassen. Das heißt, es gibt auch gar keinen Grund, sich danach zu trennen, weil es beginnt gar nie. Können Sie mal ein bisschen erklären, was das genau ist, so eine negative Beziehung?
So the word negative has a long history in philosophy. I will not go over that history, but let me say simply that I use two meanings from the phenomenological traditions. One is, I would say, comes from Sartre, understanding of consciousness as being indeterminate. That means, in a way, we don't have any attributes. The self has no attribute for Sartre, and that's why it's free. And indeterminateness means actually that we don't really know what we want because we don't really know what we are. And that is the condition of freedom. It's a condition that is both very good and that produces anxiety. Mm-hmm. And the second tradition from which it derives, which is also from phenomenology but slightly different, is from Heidegger. Negative for me is what happens when what you normally do breaks down. And so when something breaks down, you're compelled to suddenly pay attention to what it is that you're doing, even if a second ago it was completely routine and you did not think about doing it. But for Heidegger, this is, if you want, a creative moment. It's an eruption. It's a moment where things break down and they force us. The world compels us to pay attention to it. Mm-hmm. That's what also I mean by negative. It's this breaking down. And relationships, now we know, can break down at any moment, whether we are in them or before we enter them. And that's why they compel us to pay attention to them. That's what psychology, in a way, does. I mean, clinical psychology, and it compels us to pay attention to the lurking and constant danger of relationships breaking down, or relationships that have already broken down and which we try to understand because they have broken down. So these are the two meanings of negative I use in the book. And as you rightly suggested, one of the main claims of the book is that the very same forces that make it very difficult to enter relationships are the same forces that are operative when people have long-standing relationships and these relationships come apart and crumble. This is exactly the stake of the book. It is to show that it is the same set of forces that are operative in both cases.
Und diese Negativität der Beziehungen, die eben nichts damit zu tun hat, dass die Beziehungen schlecht wären oder so etwas, sondern dass sie so unglaublich brüchig auch geworden sind. Sie nennen auch einige Beispiele. Sie sagen zum Beispiel One-Night-Stands, Seitensprünge, Freundschaft plus Cybersex. Das sind alles auch Beispiele von solchen negativen Beziehungen. Die sind auch begünstigt durch den Kapitalismus. Das ist auch eine These des Buches. Wie genau hängen die beiden zusammen?
So one of the ways in which they're intertwined is that after the 1960s, when sexuality became much more free, it actually meant more equality, slightly more equality between men and women. It meant that women could enjoy the pleasures of sex which they had not until then, because sex was connected to shame and to sin. But mostly it meant that the industries of media, the industries that engage the gaze, cinema, advertising, television mostly, have used and exploited the sexualized body of men and women, but mostly women. So if until the 1970s you rarely see sex scenes, from the 1970s, but mostly from the 1980s, the number of sex scenes increased tremendously, and sexuality and sexualized bodies become an increasing fixture of advertising, cinema, and television, because it attracts visually viewers. So sexuality in that sense has become a new commodity, intensely exploited by capitalism, by scopic, what I call scopic industries, that is industries that are based on the gaze and that extract value from the sexualized body of women. And this hypersexualization of relationships has many effects on the possibility of forming emotional bonds. This is one of the issues I explore in the book.
Und dieses Zusammenspiel von Gefühlswelten und Marktbeziehungen, das ist ja etwas, was Sie schon sehr, sehr lange beschäftigt. Sie haben eigentlich ein Großprojekt dazu angelegt. Seit 20 Jahren schon beschäftigt Sie auch dieses Verhältnis. Zum Beispiel der Konsum der Romantik, das war Ihre Dissertation. Schon damals hat Sie das interessiert. Romantik und Kapitalismus, Warenwelt und Liebeswelt. Wie gehören die beiden zusammen? Wie finden sie zueinander? Und wie korrumpieren sie sich auch? Und dann das Buch Warum Liebe wehtut, jetzt Warum Liebe endet. Es geht immer wieder um dieses Verhältnis. Was bringt Sie als Soziologin dazu, sich so sehr auf diese Liebeswelt in Kombination mit dem Kapitalismus zu fokussieren?
I would say, you know, that modernity, the question of the nature of modernity, what does it mean to be modern? What does it mean to have a capitalist economy, and what does it mean to live in societies where individuals are separated, are shorn of communities, are the two main questions of sociology. And love, because probably love is traditionally associated with the women's sphere, and because sociologists, until quite recently, when the canon of sociology is mostly masculine, love was not thought to belong to sociology. And so one of the stakes, if you want, of my study, this, you're right, I mean, this research agenda, is to show that a topic or a feeling that seems to be universal and personal and individual is actually shot through by collective changes and transformations, and in particular by capitalism. So the world of feelings and the world of economics are traditionally thought of as being opposite to each other, but I think this is more a question of what our ideology would like to believe, rather than a question of empirical fact. So, for example, women and men have always brought money considerations in who they chose for a partner, and they still do today. It's whether it is acknowledged or not. Money or status or education play a very significant role in who we choose to fall in love with and to live our lives with. So these are interested, if you want, considerations. And so the question for me was, when families are not responsible anymore for matchmaking, for marriages, when the family is not the place where people are expected to make their most significant economic operation because they go and work in a capitalist market, what happens to romantic sentiments? And especially what happens to the romantic sentiment when romantic love becomes the main object, the main theme, the main target of the vast consumer markets that start being put in place from the beginning of the 20th century onward.
Sie haben dafür auch den schönen Begriff der Immodities geprägt, statt Commodities, statt Güter, Immodities, also mit Emotionen aufgeladene Güter oder Waren, die wir kaufen können. Und Sie zeigen immer wieder sehr schön auf, dass man uns zwar weismachen will, dass wir Gefühle, Liebe, Zuwendung kaufen könnten, aber eigentlich ist es immer nur die Warenwelt, die wir uns wirklich gegen Geld kaufen können. Die Frage ist ja schlussendlich auch, können wir uns eigentlich auch vielleicht Sexualität kaufen, möglicherweise, aber können wir uns eigentlich auch einen Partner kaufen? Können wir uns auch Zweisamkeit kaufen? Diejenigen, die an Sexrobotern arbeiten, meinen zum Teil tatsächlich, ja, das können wir.
Hier in Barcelona arbeitet Dr. Sergi Santos an einem Sexroboter. Früher war er erfolgreich als Forscher tätig. Heute nützt er sein Wissen, um Silikonpuppen eine Art Leben einzuhauchen.
So I have an architecture of emotion. That was my core. I have a brain, I have the architecture of a brain that can express emotions in a given way that I thought. And then I thought, do I have a humanoid system? I found a humanoid system in the sex doll industry. And then I said, okay, now I need computers that are available, ready to assemble, and I need technology that I can use to put all this together.
Und so bringt er seinen Sexroboter in Fahrt.
I want sex.
It's time to enjoy our life, right? Say Samantha, anytime.
Get sexy.
Okay?
But for example, if I touch her in the hand,
Can I multiply this feeling? Can I feel this forever?
me, seriously, if my wife left me, I live with this one. I'm not joking, huh? She gives me the company that people don't give me.
HSG St. Gallen. Ethikprofessor Thomas Beschorner ist überzeugt, dass Digitalisierung und Robotik wichtige Themen sind, die vor der Sexualität nicht Halt machen. Umfragen zeigen, dass Sex mit Robotern mehr als nur ein Fetisch ist.
Ich bin ziemlich sicher, dass die Besitzer solcher Geräte ihren Puppen sehr schnell Namen geben werden. Sie werden sicherlich gekleidet werden, auch hübsch gekleidet werden. Man wird mit ihnen reden. Man wird vielleicht mit ihnen sogar irgendwann sonntags auf der Couch sitzen und mit ihnen Tatort gucken, wenn man das weiterspinnt.
Der Sexroboter als Freundin, ist das eine gute Idee?
Probably not, but I don't know if the question is whether it's good or bad. I think the question is whether it's inevitable or not. I think it's inevitable. I think we are going towards a society where robots are going to be playing a much more increasingly a significant emotional role in our lives. Now, when you think of it, a pet is living. Of course, it's a living creature, but it's not somebody who talks back to us. And yet we give pets a great deal. We humanize pets, but we even if we anthropomorphize the pets we love, we also recognize that a pet that we love is not exactly equivalent to a human being who talks back or who yells at us or hugs us. Now imagine if we are able to create complex enough software that mimics to a great extent a human brain, and that mimics at least a great variety of emotional reactions to us. There is no reason why we would not view these creatures as hybrids, somewhere in between human beings and non-human beings, in the same way that pets are in between human beings and non-human beings. I think this is exactly what post-humanism means. It's this is exactly what living with machines means. It means that we are going to interact more and more with hybrid entities.
Es gibt Feministinnen, die sagen, ein Problem an den Sexrobotern ist klarerweise, dass die gestaltet werden nach einem Weiblichkeitsideal, das eigentlich sexistisch sei und dass in Bordellen mit solchen Sexpuppen beispielsweise auch Praktiken ausgeübt werden, die frauenverachtend seien und dass eigentlich dann ein Frauenbild kultiviert wird, das problematisch ist.
You know, one could say that the reason why so far most of the robots are female and correspond to very specific fantasies, sexual fantasies of male, one could make easily the claim that it is because women are already quite objectified, in a sense, already in society, and therefore, for many men, the possibility of switching to a robot, a sophisticated robot, is actually not that vastly different. It's really a question of continuum, because women are already objectified and treated as objects. You could very easily make the claim, but I would suspect that for reasons of market, these robots would also, be targeted to women, and therefore you would sell either women or men to women.
Sie haben am Anfang auf meine Frage, ob das eine gute Idee ist oder nicht, gesagt, das ist gar nicht die Frage, sondern die Frage ist vielmehr, ist das vermeidbar oder nicht? Ich finde das interessant. Sie sind natürlich Soziologin, Sie wollen in erster Linie beschreiben und nicht bewerten. Aber wenn wir uns zum Beispiel überlegen oder Studien anschauen, die Welt ist ja insgesamt sehr von der Sexualität durchdrungen. Es gibt die Pornification, sagt man manchmal, der ganzen Welt. Das ist auch ein Thema, was Sie eben beschäftigt. Die Warenindustrie, die sexualisiert wird. Und gleichzeitig haben die Menschen weniger Sex als früher. Am ausgeprägtesten ist das in Japan, wo 40% der Menschen zwischen 20 und 30 Jahre angeben, sie hätten überhaupt noch gar nie in ihrem Leben Sex gehabt mit einer realen Person, aber natürlich mit Sexrobotern und natürlich konsumieren sie Mangas und Pornos. Haben Sie da nach wie vor nicht den Eindruck, dass vielleicht etwas daran bedauernswert oder stoßend sein könnte?
Well, first of all, you're right. I think scientists should refrain from judging normatively their subjects, at least if they want to understand why they are doing what they are doing and which reasons people invoke for themselves. So I would always prefer, for example, as a scholar, to understand why somebody votes for Trump rather than judge the fact that somebody votes for Trump. It's very, if we want to have any traction in society, that is, if we want to have an impact on society, we need, first of all, to understand what people do. It doesn't mean that after I have understood, or hopefully understood, something about the state of values and practices in society, it doesn't mean that I don't then proceed to emit a normative judgment about it. I do. So with regard to the pornification of culture, for example, there is a huge debate among feminists whether it is a good or bad thing. Many feminists, pro-sex feminists, think that the feminism that would like to restrain the sexualization of women's body, they think that it's a Puritan, it's a form of Puritanism. And actually, in that respect, I do take a position, because I think that historically, regardless of whether you think a lot of sex is good or bad, I don't even ask that question, or whether sex is good or bad. I don't think it's my job to answer that question. But I do observe that sexuality has been tremendously recuperated by capitalist industries, and that women's bodies has been, has been the object of intensive exploitation by many media industries, where the criterion for that exploitation is always established by men, almost always established by men. So you have something almost tragic happening, which is that at the same time that women think they liberate themselves, they actually submit themselves to the gaze and the control of men in media industries.
Das ist der eine Punkt, der ist sehr interessant. Und dann gibt es ja noch einmal den zweiten, und auf den würde ich gerne noch einmal zurückkommen. Warum genau haben denn Menschen weniger Sex? Warum genau gibt es diese Tendenz? Es gibt zum Beispiel einen Artikel von 2018 aus dem Atlantic, The Sex Recession ist der überschrieben worden, also die Sexrezession. Es gibt auch einen Artikel in der Time-Zeitung, die alle aufzeigen, das Sexualverhalten, vor allem auch unter jungen Menschen, das bezieht sich immer mehr eben auf die Pornoindustrie, auf vielleicht irgendwelche Hologramme oder so etwas. Aber in den sozialen Medien auch sucht man sich entsprechende Angebote, aber nicht reale Körper, nicht reale Begegnungen.
So the very interesting study that was published by the Atlantic, I think, the Atlantic magazine in I think it was in January or December, finds indeed that the younger cohorts is having less sex than the slightly older cohorts of the 1990s. And I think one of the reasons, if not the main reason actually, is actually the theme of the book, which is that it has become much more difficult to know what are the rules to enter relationships. Most sex is practiced in stable relationships. Despite the hookup culture, if you look at the overall sexual activities that an individual has over a lifetime, most of the sex men and women have is in stable relationships. Now, if it's more and more difficult to form stable relationships, then of course you're going to have less sex, because this is where most men and women usually have a sexual relationships. So we end up, if you want, with a very interesting paradox, which is that a culture that hypersexualizes bodies and encounters actually ends up as being a culture in which there is less sex, because this culture makes the rules to enter relationships and to maintain relationships much more elusive and much more uncertain. So the whole notion of uncertainty, I think, has become a fundamental property of contemporary relationships.
Sie haben da einen sehr interessanten Punkt, der mich beschäftigt hat. Sie sagen nämlich, im Grunde genommen hat die romantische Liebe es möglich gemacht, den Partner frei zu wählen und ihn auch als eine einzigartige Person zu wählen, währenddessen jetzt eigentlich die Technologie das Umgekehrte mit uns anstellt, nämlich jeder wird vergleichbar und austauschbar und damit geht eigentlich seine Einzigartigkeit verloren.
Well, the traditional romantic love is based, almost by definition, on the identification of a unique person. And if you live in a society where you meet relatively few people, I would say it's relatively easy to identify that one person. But internet technology completely changes the economy of encounters, because we move from an economy of scarcity to an economy not of abundance but of hyperabundance. so that you know, a site, an internet site like Tinder, for example, if you have done 100 swipes, 100 likes, so Tinder forbids you from continuing for 12 hours. You can only do 100 likes a day. So that means, I mean, try to imagine, cognitively we can't process so much information. Our brain is not well equipped to be faced with such extravagant choice of possibilities of men and women who look equally attractive, who are all interesting, who have all traveled and show us their pictures with the background of an Egyptian pyramid or a beautiful island. So these objects become indistinguishable.
Lassen Sie uns doch ganz kurz anschauen, wer genau Tinder nutzt und aus welchen Gründen. Tinder ist eines der sozialen Netzwerke, das eben Kontakte vermittelt. Seit dem Jahr 2012, da ging Tinder an den Start, hat es nach eigenen Angaben 8 Milliarden Kontakte gematcht. Schauen wir ganz kurz, wie Menschen mit Tinder umgehen und leben.
Partnersuche. Heute vertrauen Millionen ihr Herz den Algorithmen an.
In 5 Minuten hat man das Profil eröffnet. Also ich habe gestaunt. Und man tut einfach ein paar Fotos drauf und ein paar Smileys und was man irgendwie gerne macht. Und paff, ist man schon drin. Und schon kommen die ersten Bildchen.
So funktioniert's. Swipen.
Jesus Gott, das ist ja herzig.
Nach rechts heißt ja.
Nein!
Nach links nein.
Oh, ich habe ein Match. Ah. Ja, und jetzt?
Mögen sich beide, ist's ein Match.
Schreibe mal.
Und los geht's mit Chatten.
Man hat fast das Gefühl, es geht nicht mehr anders, wie dass man über Plattformen Leute kennenlernt. Und eben, ich meine, ich bin seit 6 Jahren allein. Ich habe einmal in der Ferien jemanden kennengelernt und mehr nicht. Das ist es dann. Aber ich finde es immer schwieriger.
Ich habe vor allem Männer mit Bart gesucht. Also nein, nicht vor allem. Ich habe nur Männer mit Bart angeklickt. Also schon hübsche, natürlich. Sie haben sonst gut aussehen, natürlich. Und sympathisch sein, aber sie haben einen Bart haben.
Bei Tinder sei das Risiko einer Abfuhr kleiner.
Man will schnell eine neue Beziehung haben. Man will schnell wissen, woran das man ist. Man will schnell, ich denke, man geht sicher schneller mit jemandem ins Bett als früher. Muss alles auch schneller gehen.
Man kann alles erleben, was man nur möchte. Man kann sich das ja selbst gestalten und das ist das Coole daran. Weil man ist ja weder zeitlich noch örtlich gebunden durch Tinder. Und ich finde, das ist halt super cool, weil es einen viel Freiraum gibt, einfach wie man es, wann und wo man es benutzen möchte und mit wem. Und ja, ich habe echt tolle Erfahrungen damit gemacht.
Die haben gute Erfahrungen damit gemacht. Was sagen Sie dazu?
Tinder has good and bad experiences or non-experiences. Many people can say also that they can swipe endlessly, chat, maybe make an appointment to meet someone and then not meet anyone, or they would have to swipe 200 times to have 2 dates. And so for some people it works, for others it doesn't. It's extremely difficult to say, I mean, if it works. What it does do, I think, so I think if we judge Tinder or these apps by the results, we don't understand again how they work and why they are so addictive. What it does give you is hope. So I would say that the commodity that they're selling is hope. So even if you have been unsuccessful for the last 2 years, the hope keeps you going. And not only that, it also transforms dating into a game. This is actually how the very conceptors of the platform talked about Tinder initially. They talked about it as a gaming platform and as a social network platform. So they really transformed the whole idea of dating into something that is much more diffuse and much more amorphous, as something in which you meet a lot of people and you build a kind of social network and in which you play and you're gaming. It transformed entirely the approach to romantic love. So this lady is able to view it as something really cool, which enables you to experience your own freedom. I agree with her. This is exactly what the site enables you to do. It gives you a sense of your freedom, but often, not always, often it is a freedom that leaves you empty-handed.
Wenn Sie sagen, die Währung sozusagen ist Hoffnung oder das Ziel ist Hoffnung, worauf hoffen denn die Menschen?
They hope they are going to meet the love of their life. They hope they are going to meet the one person who will make a difference in this ocean of possibilities.
Aber das ist ja interessant. Also einerseits haben sich unsere Liebesverhältnisse so verändert, dass es mehrheitlich negative Beziehungen gibt, also Beziehungen, die gar nicht richtig anfangen. Diese sehr, sehr vielen, sehr flüchtigen Beziehungen, die auch auf einem großen Hedonismus beruhen. Es geht in erster Linie darum, selber das zu kriegen, was man sich erhofft und gar nicht mehr so sehr sich auf sein Gegenüber einzulassen. Und trotzdem hoffen wir auf die große, einzige, one and only Liebe.
We have different tendencies in our culture. Modern cultures are supremely contradictory. And I would say that it is these contradictions even that define what it means to be a modern human being. We aspire to security and stability and at the same time for excitement and a sense of freedom and autonomy. And then these two is what keeps us moving. And in a way I would say it is also what keeps the economy moving as well. It's this attempt to sit together or to reconcile these conflicts or contradictions. So romantic love as a utopia has not disappeared from contemporary culture. On the contrary, I think our culture has never been as obsessed with romantic love. And this is because the couple is substituting for communities and families. It's because today individuals once they reach adulthood, are thrown into a highly competitive, highly uncertain society in which the future is highly uncertain. And also, economically, it has become more difficult to make ends meet, really, as one person. So really, there are many good reasons, both psychological, emotional, and economic, to make the couple really the necessary or unit that people want to live in, mostly in order to have a stable basis, emotional basis for recognition and for validation of yourself. But at the same time, there are many forces that undermine this ideal of the one and only. And this is why we go to the psychologists. This is why we consume self-help books. This is why we consume pornography. All these tensions and contradictions are a source of enormous consumption.
Sie sagen, dass das Individuum, das moderne Individuum, speziell von dieser Zerrissenheit geprägt ist. Also das moderne Individuum ist eines, das einerseits eben diese Selbstbestimmung sucht und gleichzeitig diese Zugehörigkeit. War denn das Individuum davor auch zerrissen, aber in anderer Weise, oder war es weniger zerrissen?
I think probably less torn apart. One of the definitions of modernity, which was provided by Max Weber, is that all spheres of life, of social life, the economy, the law, the family, the religion, all start being distinct from each other, whereas beforehand they are more or less under the heading of religion, or religion organizes very many different spheres of life. So once these spheres of life separate from each other, the likelihood of them conflicting with each other is much higher. That's one thing. The other thing is that capitalism in itself is based on a formidable contradiction between, on the one hand, being a highly productive and disciplined individual who is able to forget his body and work 12 hours in order to make more and more money, so a highly rational, if you want, productive, disciplined individual. On the other hand, the same capitalist individual needs to be a consumer who is very preoccupied with his own pleasures, with release, with authenticity, with emotions. And so this kind of release control is really at the very heart of what it means to be a modern individual. And this contradiction is nourished and built in institutionally by capitalism itself.
Ich höre Ihnen so gerne zu, weil Sie mich wie selten jemand zwingen dazu, die Komplexität auszuhalten. Sie sagen dauernd, es ist auf der einen Seite so, auf der anderen Seite so. Es gibt einen Vorteil, es gibt einen Nachteil. Wir sollten nicht bewerten, wir sollten erstmal nur beschreiben. Das hat etwas unglaublich, wie soll ich sagen, Anspruchsvolles und gleichzeitig etwas für mich sehr Faszinierendes. Ich frage mich, wenn ich Ihnen zuhöre, gibt es in diesen ganzen Liebesdingen trotzdem Dinge, wo Sie sagen würden, da ist fertig mit Ausgewogenheit, mit Komplexität, sondern da ist es eindeutig so, dass da etwas ganz schief läuft?
I think that what is wrong is that there are two imperatives, one of production, economic production, and one of reproduction. Reproduction means biological reproduction. Societies need to reproduce themselves. It's by definition. And traditionally, families, women, mostly women, have done that, and that very much, and women have cooperated with the imperative of reproduction. What capitalism is doing is it is undermining reproduction. And this is what we need to understand. I think many people understand that. We have a conflict, a contradiction between production and reproduction. And so reproduction in the sense that more and more people live alone, more and more people want to live alone, less and less people want to have children, and so all of these create a crisis which I would call of reproduction. And this crisis is not provoked by women's movement, feminism, or freedom as such. It is provoked by the conditions of lives in late capitalism.
Aber die Weltbevölkerung nimmt doch weiter zu.
The world population is growing, but not in the most capitalist countries, at least not in the Western countries. On the contrary, in Japan, the reproduction rate is going down. It has gone down in different ways and levels in Italy, in Germany, in Scandinavian countries. So there is a crisis of reproduction.
Was Ihre Thesen ja auch deutlich machen, ist, wie sehr eigentlich eine alte feministische These stimmt, nämlich, dass das Private politisch ist, dass das Liebesleben tief durchdrungen ist von den Wirtschaftsverhältnissen, von den politischen Verhältnissen. Und da kann man ja auch die Frage stellen, was eigentlich eben mit der feministischen Bewegung eigentlich passiert ist, wenn gleichzeitig das Frauenbild in der Pornoindustrie, in der Werbeindustrie so sexistisch ist. Ist die Frauenbewegung, die Revolution der Frauen auf halbem Weg stecken geblieben oder was ist da genau passiert?
I think that what has happened is that when you own almost all the infrastructure of society, the economy, the military, the culture, I'm talking now about men. It is almost impossible to really change the structure of domination. So let's not forget that despite the considerable gains and advances that women have made, and they have made these advances only thanks to feminists who struggled for them, for all of women. Despite this, most of the social infrastructure in politics, the military, and the economics, and religion, and the courts has remained in the hands of men. If that is the case, I think even when you put out there an emancipatory ideology, an emancipatory idea, it is very easily recuperated by forces that are more powerful than you. This is what happened, I think, to the idea of sexual freedom, for example. Feminism has been hijacked by capitalist industries.
Ich würde gerne zum Schluss noch mit Ihnen über ein neueres Phänomen sprechen, nämlich darüber, dass ja auch Männer unter dieser neuen Liebesordnung leiden. Es gibt Männer, die organisieren sich im Internet als sogenannte Incels, Involuntary Celibates, also unfreiwillige Enthaltsame. Das ist eine Gruppe von Männern, auf die Michel Houellebecq vielleicht als erster aufmerksam gemacht hat, nämlich Männer, die in einer übersexualisierten Welt das Gefühl haben, zu kurz zu kommen, die keine Partnerin finden und vehement, aggressiv, sexistisch sich im Netz organisieren und fordern, dass die Frauen zur Monogamie gezwungen werden, damit jeder Mann eine Frau abbekommt. Sind auch diese Männer eine Folge des Kapitalismus?
Well, first of all, they are an effect of the change of patriarchal structure. So we have now different, if you want, modes of domination that are competing with each other. Patriarchy is contested by women, and whereas most men in the past could have access and easy access to the body of women, I think that access is much more scrutinized and regulated. So it's a change, it's a slight change. What they're reacting to is a slight change to males' privilege and easy and unproblematic access to women. But also, what capitalism has changed is that men and women, heterosexuals, now meet each other as if on a market. It has marketized heterosexual relationships. That is, a market is governed by the law of supply and demand. It's not regulated by families or by communities which try to match up couples. In the sexual neoliberalism, if you want, the market has the effect of making some people less successful, less in demand, and therefore they are left out, if you want, they are left out of the competition. And so they do react to this marketization, or what I would call the marketization of heterosexual relationships and the loss of male privilege.
Das heißt, der Markt produziert immer auch seine Verlierer und das ist ein Effekt davon. Wenn wir vielleicht zuletzt zur romantischen Liebe zurückkehren, Sie, die jetzt seit 20 Jahren die Liebe erforschen, was würden Sie sagen, warum lohnt sich denn die Suche nach dem einen Partner oder zumindest nach einer stabilen Beziehung, wenn die Liebe wehtut, wenn die Liebe endet?
Well, first of all, I never said that it's worthwhile.
Das habe ich jetzt zugeredet.
No. I think it is worthwhile developing meaningful relationships. But meaningful relationships are not necessarily romantic relationships or sexual relationships. So if there is one thing I would like to do in my studies, it is to definitely enlarge our field of vision and have a much broader conception of what a meaningful relationship is, which can be inspired by friendship, it can be inspired by the care for others, it can be inspired by the love of children. In a way, I like the religious view of love, the religious, I mean Christian, love of human beings as being something that is very meaningful.
Die Nächstenliebe.
The love, well, not an abstract other as in Christianity, but love of very concrete persons which need not to be sexual romantic partners. And in a way, I would want us to, again, as I said, to enlarge, to widen our imagination and to see our lives as having many more possibilities of extremely meaningful bonds than the idea of romantic love. The idea of romantic love creates very narrow path for human development and human fraternity and brotherhood or sorority and sisterhood, if you want.
Ist das auch der Grund, warum Sie dieses Buch ja widmen Ihren Familienmitgliedern? Sie widmen es Geschwistern, Mutter und den Kindern?
Well, you know, I think the family today is the only non-capitalist institution in the sense that it is the only institution you do not really choose. And so that's why I think the family for me has become so interesting, because in a world where you choose everything you are, including your body and sexuality, haircut, culinary taste, etc., your family is the only thing you don't choose, which means it is the place of enormous learning and growing, because it is the place where you simply have to live with what has been given to you. And that's why I find it so interesting and why I call it a non-capitalist, a non-modern place. It's, if you want, the only remnant of traditional societies in modern society.
Damit würde ich gerne schließen. Ich danke Ihnen ganz, ganz herzlich, Eva Illouz, dass wir uns hier in Berlin treffen konnten. Danke sehr. Danke für Ihr Interesse, eine gute Woche und bis bald.